morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is JulianMcBride. I am a forensic anthropologist and a human rights officer affiliated with the United Nations, Docs Without Borders, and International Rescue Committee. I work with various NGOs and international organizations, along with international governments, to carry war crimes and details of the victims of war, particularly to make sure their stories are told in public, because we all will know in this day and age, if we don't learn our history, we're bound to repeat it, and right now history's been repeating itself a lot. And today I'm going to present you with my PowerPoint called 1915 and Beyond, how reflections from the genocides in 1915 carried on the war crimes and genocides we see today. This event came about from artwork that I use for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I am also a Marine veteran, combat veteran. I served in Afghanistan in 2012, 1st Battalion, 7 Marines. A lot of my friends suffered PTSD. We lost 6 of our own brothers in Afghanistan. And I use art therapy to cope with post-traumatic stress disorder. But I use my art to tell the stories of victims of war because I understand the pain and trauma they also went through along with their families. A particular focus of mine is 1915, the Syrian, Armenian, Greek genocides, because that's the genocide this day and age right now that's being talked about more and more, especially right now in November, as the Armenian Genocide resolution was recently passed by the US House of Congress. And it's a big issue to where this genocide, where if it truly is universally recognized, the rest of the world will recognize following genocides that happen afterwards. It's considered the first modern genocide/Holocaust. This is dedicated to all the victims of war that have perished. History has always been written by the victims. This time, history will be written by the victors. The definition of genocide is the complete intent to destroy a racial ethnic group or ethnicity completely and as a whole. Universally recognized genocides today considered the Holocaust of World War II, over 20 million people killed, along with 6 to 10 million Jews, Poles, Slavs, and other undesirables by the Nazi regime. The Rwandan genocide, over 800,000 to 1 million Tutsis were killed by Hutu rebels during the 1994 Rwanda genocide. And the Bosnian genocide of 1995, for 2 days, over 8,000 Bosniaks were killed by the Serbian military. Genocides that are not universally accepted yet are considered the Native American genocide here, our own indigenous population that has never really gotten recognition for the massacres and the broken treaties, over 400 so far that have been counted when the early settlers came to America. That's not even counting the indigenous populations who have been persecuted around Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. The Syrian, Greek, and Armenian genocide as well. And these following are the art pieces that I've drawn for the art gallery, which are posted around the room, but I'm going to give a display right here, just in case anybody could see these art pieces if you couldn't make it today. This is one of my first art pieces I've drawn. This is a heroic veteran's last stand in ancient Abdera. Abdera is located in Polystylon, Western Thrace in Greece. I did this for one of my research papers at National Conference of Undergraduate Research in 2017. This field expedition was conducted by Professor Agnostis G. Agirakis and Professor Ergi Agirakis of Adelphi University, of an ancient veteran who was a Greek veteran of the Byzantine Empire / Eastern Roman Empire, who fought off Ottoman onslaught into their fort. For over 20 years, they were under siege in Western Thrace, and eventually the Ottomans overran the fort, and this veteran was decapitated, and his body was separated post-decapitation from his head, particularly as a way to mock the Christian forces, because their bodies had to be placed whole in order to ascend to the afterlife. And eventually what we found out was Professor Agirakis and his field team were able to find the full body. They published it as well. The head was facing towards east, and because of that, the reason why is because when head faced towards east in a Christian religion, basically you're facing Jerusalem, which is a main focus, and the Byzantine Empire was Christianity. The locals actually found the head and the full body and placed it in a child's grave. A Syrian refugee, Omran. This is a famous pic of Omran, a Syrian refugee who was found underneath rubble in Aleppo. And when Syrian workers found him, the rescue committee found him, he wasn't crying at all, barely phased, pretty much desensitized. This isn't normal for children around the world, where we take advantage of our day-to-day lifestyles. We have to remember the hardships of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other children who suffer day-to-day brutalities to where it becomes the norms in their lifestyles. Never take advantage of where you're from or your privileges, because there's always someone willing to take your place right now compared to the lifestyle they have. This 3rd century Roman skull was actually another publication of Dr. Adnostis P. Algerakis, of a Roman military veteran who was found at a fort in Italy of King Philip, Alexander the Great's father. This Roman had surgery, cranial surgery, right here he had a swelling in the brain. And the doctors of the Roman relief force pretty much put another hole in his head as a way of pretty much relieving the pain and swelling. So this veteran ended up living on after the surgery, even with a hole in his head. And eventually the veteran did eventually die, but this is a picture that actually shows that ancient medicine actually did hold very much great effects in life. Domestic violence. This is away from war, but I wanted to show even trauma can come in domestic situations. This is Nicole Simpson, who was murdered by her husband, O.J. Simpson, but he was acquitted of the murder. She was found with multiple lacerations of her neck, multiple stab wounds. We couldn't even get the official picture of her, so I had to draw it with pastels around it to show what her body most likely looked like post-death. Even the only people who actually have Nicole Simpson's actual post-forensic, post-mortem photo are her family. It has never been released to the public because that's how brutal it is. This is an Armenian Resistance photograph of 2 women who went to war against the Ottoman Empire during the Hamidian massacres. Armenians were largely blamed for the recent military failures in the Caucasus, Russia region. Over a million refugees, Kurdish and Circassian refugees, came into the Ottoman Empire, which pretty much made a combustible region even more combustible. So, with all the refugees, there was no place to settle them. The Ottoman Empire told the new refugees, while the Armenians, Greeks, and Assyrians of Eastern Anatolia were most likely responsible for the military failures, why not you just take their houses instead? So over 200 to 40,000 Armenians were killed in the resistance, but a lot of Armenians, particularly female Armenians, took a resistance against the massacres. And eventually, a good majority of those Armenians fled into Russia. And now, this was used as propaganda, eventually again, by the Ottoman Empire to show that Armenians were disloyal and were more friendly towards Russia than they were to Turkish forces, which they were later used in the 1915 genocides. This woman on the right here, is actually the grandmother of world-famous musician Derek Sherinian. This is a picture of atrocities against the Syrians. The Ottoman Empire during the 1915 genocides would leave particularly Armenian women and children to starve to death in the Syrian desert. These are a couple of children who were killed during the genocides. And again, with the Syrian genocide, it's called Sefo. The reason why they call it Sefo is because it's Assyrian for the word sword. Primarily, they were killed by swords during the genocides, where even this mother and child were killed with a slash wound by a sword. This is an Iraqi child who was violently taken to the ground by U.S. Marine forces during the initial invasion, which is now most likely considered very much illegal during the initial 2003 invasion, where the Iraqi government was largely toppled in less than a couple of weeks by U.S. forces. This girl tried to run and hug her father. Marines violently detained her father and her and pushed her to the ground, causing the facial wounds that you see here. This is also an Armenian who was decomposed, largely exhumed from Syrian desert. And This is the decomposition remains of the Armenian. As you can see, the lacerations and trauma around the victim's body. This one particularly is one of my saddest ones, but it's one of my deepest photos. The world is not always black and white. It's not exactly what they teach us, particularly in our textbooks that are not exactly truly accurate. There is no right or wrong or good and evil, but you can see that a lot of things around the world were not really covered. You'll never see a photo like this in the media because it doesn't go against a good agenda. Such as Syria, proxy wars in Syria and Yemen caused by largely our government's proxy wars. You'll never see the devastation our government causes by them. This is the cycle of violence in Yemen, where a 9-year-old child went to school, blown up by a drone by the Saudi forces, but that drone was made in America, as well as largely a drone that was purchased by the Saudi government, by the United States government. And so, when that child's family came to that child, what do you think filled their heads? Well, rage. That rage will carry back on to where they want revenge against the Saudi government and the government that backs them, the United States government, which will largely create a new brand of terrorists. And because of that, you'll have a continuous cycle of violence where you have a bunch of people who now hate the United States government, who want revenge against the United States government. The United States government will use that to justify constant militarized actions again and again. Sins of the father. And this is basically where post-colonization in Africa, you had a lot of nations such as England, Belgium, France. How they installed rule in Africa was a divide and conquer strategy. You give favoritism towards a certain tribe instead of all the other tribes. Therefore, all those tribes hate the new tribe that has been favoritized compared to the other ones. Such an example in Rwanda, where Tutsis were favored more than Hutus by the Belgian and German governments. That would largely create a more envious action by the Hutus, who now saw themselves as inferior because that's how Europeans educated them, that they were inferior because they were darker than the Tutsis, they had bigger noses, they were undesirable. And largely that division would later create tribal violence, as you see in this picture today. Child soldiers. There are over 300,000 child soldiers today. That's unacceptable. Children should not be deprived of their lifestyle for another man's greed, especially tribal violence. Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, Nigeria, even Uganda, where children are forcibly stripped of taken from their homes, their parents are largely killed, they're brainwashed into youth, to where they can't even grow up to enjoy their childhood. All they know is war and conflict. This is the Dresden woman, a woman who was largely found after the bombing of Dresden, which is largely considered a war crime in this day and age. For a couple of days, US and British forces completely firebombed the city of Dresden, Germany. The temperature actually reached 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's how hot it was during the bombing. Incendiary weapons, napalm were all used. And largely it was so hot, the oxygen lit on fire, largely where people's skin burned off, but it was very, very slow. Their skin boiled. That's what really made it a war crime, was it wasn't just a bombing. They also violently tortured 25,000 civilians. Horrors of Nanking. Largely this is obsolete in Japanese history books, but this is an issue that needs to be brought up again and around the world, is what happened in Nanking when Imperial Japan invaded China, where over 300,000 to 1 million civilians were largely killed in very barbaric manners. Children were beheaded by katanas, waterboarding, burning people alive. Even reports of Japan using German shepherds to even maul people to death. This mother and her child were simultaneously decapitated by Imperial Japanese forces, largely published in Japanese newspapers, because that's how they raised morale in the Imperial Army. An Armenian father and child, a father who served in the labor battalion in Armenia, was released by the Ottoman Empire. during the genocides. But when he goes back to his village, he finds that his child has been killed by those same Ottoman forces that he served. This picture pretty much speaks for himself. And this picture is crucified Armenian women sent out to the Syrian desert completely naked. They were sexually molested, crucified, and then left to rot in the Syrian desert, which can reach up to anywhere between 120 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit peak summer. This is an Armenian family that was death marched into Syrian desert, and pretty much I made my own caption of what most likely happened so the entire world can understand truly what the Armenians went through when they were death marched by Ottoman forces. This is from the mother. My star, Anush, please get up for mommy. Anush, mommy, I can't get up. I need water. My feet are failing me. We've been walking for 2 days without food or water. Mama, I feel like I'm going to die. The mother replies, please, baby, get up. The janissaries behind us will shoot us if they think you're too weak to make the journey. Please, honey. Mother, how much longer must we endure this pain? The mother replies, until God gives us salvation from these monsters. And the little sister also replies, please get up, sis, I can't live on without you. This entire family was most likely killed upon arrival to Syria. That's even if they made the arrival, as Armenians weren't even given food or water during the genocide. Nationalism is what eventually caused this genocide, and I'm basically going to go over what nationalism is. There's a difference between patriotism, where you love your country, but you can also call out what's wrong in your country and you want to improve it, and nationalism, unwavering loyalty for your country no matter what they do, and unwavering support for a head of state. And nationalism peaked during World War I, which eventually caused the 1915 genocides of Armenians, Greeks, and Syrians. Due to the influx of mass refugees after the Ottoman Empire lost almost all their European holdings in the Balkans and the Caucasus region, the Ottoman Empire largely blamed the Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian communities of Asia Minor for all their losses, and eventually raised the issue that if the empire was going to fall, the new nation Turkey should only be for Turks, Turks for Turkey, which was largely used by the Triumvirate, also known as the Young Turks, CUP, Talat, Digimon, and Enver Pasha. And as you can see, these ethnic groups were largely used as scapegoats. And here you see two Armenians who are hung to death on display in Constantinople, now known as Istanbul, which was largely the capital of the Ottoman Empire during that day and age. An execution of a Syrian soldier, ISIS, also known as the Islamic State, as what some would call, executes a Syrian soldier who was largely trying to defend his homeland. ISIS was pretty much born from, as we now know, U.S. foreign policy, the destabilization of the Middle East, and largely the Iraq destabilization gave birth to new terrorist organizations who would later use the destabilization of Iraq and Syria after their civil war to largely have a home base to spread terror around the world. As you see now, ISIS's former leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was killed a couple weeks ago by Delta forces in Syria, but right now, Syria is considered a safe haven for terrorist groups, largely because of our foreign policy. And this is my final drawing. I call it a brotherhood without borders. Right now you see a German soldier injured, being treated by a French resistance soldier. Because at the end of the day, us veterans, us service members, we're nothing more than pawns in a bigger game. Why is it fair that young people should die for another old man's greed? There's always a brotherhood without a border. You shoot somebody on the other side of that battlefield, they're just trying to defend themselves, you're just trying to defend yourself. But at the end of the day, it's the old people who live in our capitals who make millions of dollars while we make pennies. They want us to do this war because they make profits out of it. Just remember always where you come from, remember right or wrong, and always question everything. My name is JulianMcBride, and thank you for coming to my art gallery. Around this room, we have all my art pieces with descriptions. If you have any questions, just please let me know. Thank you.